Hello, welcome to the 9th episode of Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Marc Kate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
And let me introduce you to our guest today, professional goth, Bay Area DJ, Nako.
Hello, everybody.
This episode is about the 1988 film Beetlejuice. And a heads up, for next episode we will be doing the 1985 film Return of the Living Dead, which is probably my favorite movie, period, maybe.
Yeah, I realized we had a conversation earlier in the show where I was shitting all over it, and then I watched clips
and
of
you
it.
didn't know how much it meant to me at the
I
time.
know. Well, I mean, that wouldn't have changed my opinion at all. But I went back and looked at like clips from it,
Yeah.
and I realized I actually really do like it. Like, first of all, it was the first naked punk rock girl I'd ever seen.
That's
that
important.
Movie. Super
Yeah.
huge.
Oh,
Definitely
absolutely.
had some sort of effect.
Yeah.
And just the whole idea, like... There's a scene where they roll up in this old like 50s car,
Yeah.
and it has "Why Bother" spray painted on
Right,
the side of it.
right.
It's like my favorite thing in the world.
It set the tone for the rest of your life.
It really did. It really did.
Okay, so
As always, please go over to iTunes or Stitcher, whatever you happen to be listening to this show on right now, and give us a rating and review. As of this recording, we're close to 50, which is huge.
what?
Yeah, obviously, iTunes changed its algorithm. We have yet to hit the new and notable, but one day we will achieve it. If you're into inspirational messaging and horrific images, go over to Instagram and check out @scarythoughts.podcast. That's really our finest work, in my opinion. And
So good. It's so much better than this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast is great.
Hey.
It's in the long shadow of our Instagram account.
I mean, I'm like, by day, a professional marketing guy, and I totally put it in my portfolio. So that should tell you.
I put goth in my resume.
See?
So good.
In a way.
I used to have a business card that said Marc Kate, Candy Kid.
Oh.
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's just
It's because
I don't
it's
know
terrible.
I don't know what it means.
How far down on your LinkedIn profile is that?
Okay, so before you get too far into this podcast, you should know this is all spoilers. We've all seen it several times, Beetlejuice. We're assuming you have too. So don't be surprised if we're suddenly ruining things for you.
It's
Because
about
you've been
damn time.
warned.
Yeah, it's about time.
Yeah, you've
You
had
should have
decades.
seen it. We might ruin other things that we don't know, too, for you.
Yeah. So where shall we start?
Well, start with Naka. Where did you first see this movie, and did the gothiness of Lydia Dietz have any effect on your life? Because it had a huge effect on mine.
Absolutely. I think that was actually the first time where I saw a definitive goth look. I think that maybe before the movies that really influenced me that were around the same time was Lost Boys, which was huge. But there was no real women in there except for the hippie. And then probably Annie Potts' character in Pretty in Pink, who she owned the record store. Mm-hmm. But that was just basically...
Not goth, but like a post-punk
Right,
character.
right. And then
Yeah.
the movie Sid and Nancy, too, which I think came around the same time, was also really good. But she was definitively goth. I did immediately go out and buy a giant straw hat. I've got the big black hat. I have several photos of myself with the veil, too, I think. And at that point in my life, I think I didn't really know any other goth. Like back then it was called mod. I grew up in North Bay in Santa Rosa, so relatively small, like alternative community. There wasn't a whole lot, like everybody who was just sort of a weirdo got together. And since I attended an all-girls Catholic school, I was kind of on my own for this.
Classic.
Right. That's how I turned out. And I think at the time it came out, too, there was just musically, there was a lot of great albums that had a huge effect on my musical taste, still today. Like, came around that time, I think it was The Cure's Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Music for the Masses, I think Susie's Peep Show, also New Order Substance. I think Sisters of Mercy, Floodland was also around that time. So those are some huge albums in my life. So, in a way I had the sound, but I didn't have a look. And then she came out in her first line, not her first line, but it was like, my life is one big dark room. And of course I was just like, I want to be you. And so I did get the big straw hat. And I think that maybe it was the first time there was solidly a gothic character in a movie. up until then, I don't think there was one where it was
in a major movie.
In a major movie,
Yeah.
where I mean, as like a subculture that wasn't like part of like anything else. It wasn't just like a punk dressed in black. It wasn't
right.
Like she was definitely like a precursor to the '90s look for goth. So it was a huge deal. Like everybody wanted to have Lydia bangs. Everyone wanted the hat, especially the wedding dress.
I think it was also a really interesting choice for them to not have her be a goth. That she was, so you read her character as the blackness, the attitude, everything was deeply part of her. It wasn't an affect because she didn't have Joy Division and Bauhaus posters. Mm-hmm. It was something, and the music in the film is Harry Belafonte. It's like nothing could be further from being goth than Harry Belafonte music. So she wasn't part of some sort of subculture, which I think made it actually more interesting.
I don't think it was even really defined in any way yet. Granted, I grew up isolated. I'd never had MTV, any sort of thing I got. So I think that's another thing that appealed to me, was that it seemed really organic. Like she was just herself. And it was kind of like me, where I was like, yes, this is someone I could be friends with. She probably would enjoy going out to the graveyard and trying to like hide together in the shadow of a mailbox.
And that is why the end, I'm just going to skip right to the end. The end feels like such a betrayal. That she, at the very end, she's completely normalized. Yep. She has the schoolgirl outfit, although that kind of makes sense too. And her whole deal is like dancing around with the football players. Mm-hmm. Even though they're undead football players, they're still undead jocks. Yep. Which is super, super weird.
No, it's a reverse Sandra Dee from Grease.
Yeah, totally.
I kind of, in a way, liked that though, because I think that in a way she was still herself and just still fitting in with other people, which was something that I was trying to do myself, was like, I want to be myself but still be around these other people, and I really liked that she was able to do that, and that there was some resolution between like the living and the dead. And I thought that was also really interesting, because I don't think I up to that point had ever seen a movie where ghosts were viewed as something that you should get along with and should not be afraid of.
Until Patrick Swayze really took it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, that was different. That was like...
The metaphysics of the two movies are really similar, though.
How's that? Like, I've never seen Ghost.
Well, I mean, part of it has to do with like sort of the intensity of the act of the spirit sort of can break the veil a little bit, and then there are some people who just are natural mediums, like Whoopi Goldberg's character. It can pick up on like for instance, Patrick Swayze's character, and then eventually the lid comes off of it, and then she's like inundated with all these jokes, and she's a fake medium, which is interesting because Otho's kind of legitimately spooky too. Like he mentioned several like biographical things in the film where he's an experimental chemist, which to me just means he's into LSD, right. Especially from being in New York. And then he's part of Antonin Artaud's theater group in the mid-'70s, and he's also a paranormal investigator. So he is legitimately strange and unusual, as is Lydia Dietz.
But that's what we know from his mouth. I always just kind of read him as like just a poser. Well, we're gonna use like 80s parlance. Like I kind of assumed he was just completely full of shit. He's just shammed this family with a little bit too much money.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would think so. There's evidence in the film where Lydia Dietz's mom, her agent just says, "You're a flake. You've always been a flake." Right. And she's totally full. She is for sure full of shit. Like you just look at her artwork, her whole like. Everything I do is art. I'm going to lose my mind if I don't do art out in a small town, which is ludicrous. And she's kind of under Otho's spell. So he's for sure like an art charlatan.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes sense that they grabbed onto the one real thing that happened, but it was great that they had the only way they could get through to these ghosts was through Lydia, who was, no, yes, no, forget it, I hate you.
Well, she's the real deal.
She's a very real character, and I really do I liked the idea that it was also just funny, because I think it's just something that's just in Western culture, at least, like that ghosts will linger if they don't realize they've died, that it does take someone who's a weirdo or unusual to be able to see them or to communicate with them. And it's always, at least in movies, it's always someone strange. But that in this case, the ghosts were so personable, and that maybe she herself was not like very antisocial, and in maybe real life would probably not have gotten along with these people had they not been dead.
Right.
And then we have this disgusting, funny character, Beetlejuice, who I still actually don't really even like. Like, when I rewatched the movie, I was like, he's pretty annoying. He's also gross. And in my head, I'm not exactly sure what part he played, except for that it really set the tone for the aesthetic of later Tim Burton movies. I think that movie, you kind of see the beginning of him, like, doing the contrast of, the really, really bright, like, normal, I guess, life with this strange world that was, the other, like, contrasting it a lot. That I think that was even more clear when, like, Edward Scissorhands came out and you got the outrageous colors. But that was, I think, for me also, like, just interesting to see that sort of separation just so clearly defined in a weird, cartoonish way. Another thing I really appreciated that movie was that it was like Halloween, but not during Halloween. It was not a Halloween movie.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it kind of, for me, sort of like solidified that something that I did was kind of part of something, and I just needed to find those people. I wasn't just like this weird black island in a subculture that was defined, and which was the punk subculture. And, it kind of mixed in a lot, just small town.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, like now the subculture I belong to is a homeowner subculture. And so the whole idea of Maitland spending 2 weeks at home working on their house sounds fucking delightful to me. Just to be able to go, because I did like 2 weeks ago, I painted our whole house, and and even like not having to leave your home for like 100 years if it could stay the way you liked it. That sounds awesome. Like, to not have to go outside ever. It's pretty much where I'm at in my life.
I love that the conversation just shifted so radically from who are we identifying with in this movie.
Like, no.
Like the old people, the homeowners.
Yeah, they're great. Speaking of the homeowners, man, we talked about this before the show started, but I totally forgot that Alec Baldwin was the Baldwin in this movie. I mean, now that he's pretty much stuck being a corpulent Trump impersonator, like it's easy to forget that he's so, like, just young and delightful in this movie, and as is Gina Davis is awesome. Child porn enthusiast Mr. Rooney is in this, playing a great character as he always did.
The bird watcher.
Just like, why have you done this to us all? We loved the movies you were in, and now there's always going to be this stain on them.
Yeah,
which sucks. Thanks, dickhead.
Well, getting away from that quickly. I feel like Baldwin is sort of like, there's pre-Glengarry Glenn Ross and post-Glengarry Glenn Ross. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like his career split. He became this institution after that, like, what was it? He just, like, walked in, did a 3-minute scene, and walked off. Like, that was, it completely changed his career into this very memorable character that I think defined who he was as an actor ever after.
He was entirely almost forgettable in Beetlejuice, actually.
Those eyes.
It's still like it was
ones on his fingers.
Yeah. I loved that part when they were trying to figure out how to scare people, and then sitting in like the DMV of dead people was an interesting concept.
Yeah, the metaphysics of the bureaucracy is so original and interesting to this film.
It really is interesting. Like, I think that something interesting that I don't want to say Tim Burton invented by any means, but something he really brought to cinema is that he was able to, and especially in a movie like this, create a reality that is preposterous, that is full of continuity errors, that makes no sense, has completely its own logic, but allows you as a viewer to just sort of like sink into it comfortably and not have too many questions, like the reality in the world of Beetlejuice. Like, what world are we in? Well, we're in a world where when you die, it's sort of like the movie Brazil. You know, and that's how it is. And, like, you're given a handbook on how to be dead. Like, that's a really, really ridiculous stretch of reality for us to like accommodate that as being the world we live in.
Yeah.
But Tim Burton just makes it kind of fun and easy to just sort of like, well, this is what it's like when you're dead.
Yeah,
right?
there's something so Tim Burton-y about the idea that over and over again, whenever they have questions, everybody says, oh, it's different for everybody. Like the time you're in your home is different. The amount of distance you have to work around in is different. Like how you die even appears to make you different in the afterlife. Yet everybody gets the same stupid book. You get a caseworker. You only get 3 visits with them during your time on Earth.
Right.
And it's just weird and absurd.
Yeah.
It also doesn't fit into like any idea of life or death, you know, like, you know, we were mentioning Ghost earlier, and there was clearly a heaven and a place where they were going to go to because they had unfinished business. Here, they wanted to stay in the house and just live with the people that lived there too. So and it wasn't like that. It wasn't like a horrible thing that they were stuck. It was horrible that someone was ruining the house, which is already kind of ugly. Anyway, to begin with, the wallpaper was hideous. So I thought that was interesting too, like being able to coexist with this other world, and that that in the movie there was never this concept of like moving on because it was their dream house. They wanted to stay there. I didn't necessarily get the feeling that they thought they were trapped. It was just that they didn't want to be tied to a house that was going to be destroyed and turned into something that wasn't theirs anymore.
Right, they didn't want change. And there's that really sweet moment where they're like, there's nobody else, and he looks at her and he's like, maybe this is heaven. You know,
Right.
And for me, I thought that too. I was like, man, I wouldn't mind spending all this time with my wife in this house, you know, just because this is what I like to do. But if somebody came in and changed it, that would be the worst. Especially like a radical change where they've chosen this like really tacky small town, like Connecticut-y like nonsense, and then you have this like dark wave Dwell magazine nightmare comes to roost at their home.
Well, I wonder if on the Scary Thoughts podcast, we often talk about what does this say about collective dread in the culture. Like, okay, when this movie came out, not that this is necessarily a horror film, but the anxieties of the horror filmness of Beetlejuice, what is that saying about 1988 reality, right? And it's kind of hard to place because I don't think that this film plays by those rules, but there is a little bit of maybe what you're saying, like a lot of, like the Amityville Horror, for example. There are a lot of horror films that are about the anxiety of home ownership, about protecting the small town and the retreat and sanctity of your home. And this film does play on that, of like, what if you had to watch your home being destroyed by these aesthetic monsters while you were still stuck in the house?
It is an interesting twist on basically the whole horror concept of a ghost or spirits tied to a house, and then the living people not wanting to leave, and usually it's a horrible outcome. Where
It's almost like the dead are being haunted by the living in this film.
Absolutely, that's why there's a
Yes.
bioexorcist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Beetlejuice.
totally.
I guess it's exactly like that.
Yeah. And then sometimes I just think about why his character was such an exaggeration and caricature of I'm not sure what.
I think that's why the character was really strong, is there is a big I don't know what. Like,
Yeah.
you don't get a sense of him.
Right.
He doesn't make a lot of eye contact with people. He's not in the movie for very long. He doesn't show up until like 25 minutes into... You're talking about Beetlejuice,
Right,
the character. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
He doesn't show up until way late in the movie. He's actually not in it very much.
Barely in it.
No.
And he's kind of often just doing his own thing in the corner of the screen, and it's really erratic, and then they cut away. So it's even hard to get a sense of what he is, which I guess that's a common thing. Again, it's not necessarily a true horror film, but like that's what a killer in a horror movie usually is. They're just usually kind of like, you just see a flash of a knife and someone's dead. Or in this movie, it's like you just see a greasy forehead and someone's annoyed.
Right. Maybe he was like, although that character did seem to be the one thing that they could unite about, like that's the one thing they didn't want collectively
True.
in the house, and was really the one odd character. And I think after that too, those stripes and the whole, that weird outside world when they step through the door and it's got this Dali-esque landscape and they've got the sandworm, I think that really cemented part of his aesthetic for movies afterward. Absolutely. But, they never explain that part, but in a way it makes sense. In the movie, it's just not explained, like, why this weird world if they try to leave the house.
Saturn. It's Saturn. Like that, which makes zero sense.
Right.
Totally.
And he makes a reference to, like, having made it through the Black Plague. So he's theoretically centuries old.
Yeah. Well, doesn't he actually say, like, isn't there a line where one of the first things he says is that he's been trapped for, like, hundreds of years? Which means that suit somehow, like, just, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like his David Johansen outfit.
I don't know where that's Yeah, the makeup was stunning in that movie. Mm-hmm. I remember kind of wanting to look like the bitchy receptionist at the dead office with
Miss Argentina.
Yes.
It's pretty rad.
Yeah, it's like...
I want to back up to something that kind of stuck in my craw about this movie, and that earlier you brought up the visual art and the what's her name, Dietz. Oh my god,
Mrs. Dietz. That's just what I've been calling her.
So Mrs. Dietz is this artist, and I'm always really confused by Hollywood and television's insistence that visual artists are universally full of shit, pretentious scammers. Like I absolutely challenge you and our listeners at home to name name 2 movies that has a visual artist or a curator in it that aren't like evil murderers, absurd, full of themselves, like grotesquely pretentious.
I almost feeling that it was almost kind of arbitrary because, again, the look is really strong with her. Like, in that movie, I did want to dress like her at points, and Lydia.
Her fashion in this movie was amazing.
It's amazing.
There's one outfit I had never noticed before, and it's fucking great. It's her best outfit. So, Mr. Dietz is wearing a red and white sweater.
Yes.
And then when she's cooking food, she's wearing his sweater as pants.
Yes.
With suspenders.
Yes.
It is phenomenal. And I never noticed it before watching this film.
It just happens. It's just sort of like a background thing to notice.
She steps out and you get the full view of it when she's saying, the only thing I'm worried about is you embarrassing me at this party full of people who have all been in Vanity Fair.
Right.
And you're just looking at her pants and you're like, really? That's all you're worried about, huh? Okay.
With suspenders.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I was just right now thinking about, like, artists or conceptual artists, how they're represented in film.
Yeah.
And, like, even the film Basquiat, you get a hint that there's a bit of an art scam going on with him. And I actually kind of had that opinion about him from that film before I actually saw his pieces in real life. And the first time I saw one, I was like, oh, this is some serious shit. This is actually great. And it's not just about that he was a junkie that got famous and he was good looking or whatever. Like, there's actual talent here. And I feel even in a film about an artist that was great, that still happened.
Yeah.
You have Maud Lebowski.
Right.
And The Big Lebowski is totally absurd.
Yes. Like the movie After Hours, Murder Party, which is the movie that the Blue Ruin, Green Room guy did first. We should cover it sometime. It's really good.
Now I'm thinking about it. That's probably one time where maybe Tim Burton did play into a stereotype, which is that, artists.
Well, if we want to talk about stereotypes in Tim Burton, I found it hard.
Come on, Marc, ruin Tim Burton for us.
Yeah,
I think he ruined himself.
Yeah, well, okay, there are two. Okay.
I agree.
There are 2 ways to ruin Tim Burton. One is to just point out the last 15 years of his filmmaking career.
Yeah, Planet of the Apes.
But
in your face.
But watching this film, it was kind of hard for me not to go like, okay, there are 2 black characters. One of them is like an ignorant football player. Like I think his line of dialogue is like, da 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 da. And then the other one is like a spear-holding headhunter. You're like.
Well, I think the headhunter is a white hunter who's been killed, right?
And his head was shrunken.
Because he has a rifle. He's like the victim of headhunting.
No, the guy on the other side.
Oh, the other guy. Right. The guy who probably killed him.
With probably has a bone through his nose.
Yeah,
it's really like So those are probably the only two black people in any Tim Burton film
One
until
of the
Miss
movers.
Peregrine.
One of the movers.
But I mean, at the time when
Right, who is destroying furniture.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, I mean, in a way that made sense to me because I grew up in a small town, Asian, and I mean, the 80s really fetishized Japanese culture.
Oh, yeah.
In a crazy way, and it was still going on toward
In
the
an
late 80s.
uncomfortable way.
You know, and I'd watch that and I'd be like, okay, you know, and so to me, it actually it didn't faze me one bit to see that. In retrospect, maybe, yeah, but I can't like pass it on to the time that it happened and the town it happened. It was, you know, they were in Connecticut in a small town. You're not going to get a whole lot of diversity. Lydia was a diversity pretty much because she was the weirdo. I think it had more to do with personality. I didn't think it had anything to do with anything but that.
Like the real estate agent's daughter rolls the window up when Lydia walks up to the
Right,
car, which is super funny.
It is.
And then the barber that operates next to the Maitlands
Is amazing.
He's amazing. And his big story is about how somebody with long hair came into his barbershop one day and asked for a trim. And he's like, I just lopped it off, or whatever he did, you know. It's amazing.
Right. And it kind of reminded me of the small town I lived in, you know, like I remember, you know, because my parents owned like a hamburger stand, and I grew up flipping burgers in my gothness, and I had
phenomenal.
Do you have photos of that?
Oh yeah, I do. I had a coffin necklace, and they'd be like, don't make her mad, she'll put you in her coffin. And it was these, you know, the workers that, you know, there used to be like a rock quarry and out there, and they'd come out for lunch, and we had the big turnaround was the big rigs and stuff, and like I would make them breakfast and hamburgers, and I would have, you know, my like crucifixes and my eyeliner and my apron that had nothing, you know, but I was, you know, Doc Martens, but you know, that was just like a character, I was just part of the town.
Right.
So, you know, I think that was probably around the same time that movie came out. I don't think I saw it in the theater. I think I saw it, you know, at home with my family, and it was just funny. But yeah, now that I think about it, there's a lot of stuff in there that's weird. Like he lived through the plague, and it's like, but he lied about everything.
Yeah, totally unreliable.
So,
you know,
what was it with the Zagnut bars? I mean,
yeah, that's like from the 50s,
right?
So. But that moment though, there's so many cool little references to horror movies in this film. You know, when he grabs the fly in the Zagnut scene, the fly goes, "Help me, help me," which is of course the original fly.
Right.
He talks about having seen The Exorcist 167 times, and it keeps getting funnier every time he sees it. And then when Lydia Dietz runs into the Maitlands in their sheets and they're haunting the home, and she thinks it's her parents playing a sex game. When she discovers that they're ghosts, she immediately wants to know if they're all Night of the Living Dead under there.
Right.
So you have like all these references to
Right.
these classic horror films, and those things never really play out in the film at all. Like it always doesn't go in that direction.
Yeah.
Which I think there's just so many gags in this film too. It has that sort of Gremlins 2 Looney Tunes-ness.
Yep.
Like the sort of like Wile E. Coyote kind of logic.
But it walks a line that I feel it doesn't cross.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's pretty wackadoodle, but it doesn't get part of what happened to Tim Burton that I cannot abide, is that wackadoodleness just sort of took over. Mm-hmm. I feel like he sort of took the part of what's cookie cutter about so much of what he's done for a while now is that he's just cranked all of those elements up to 11,
mm-hmm.
where actually more is less.
Right.
You know, like if everything's completely histrionic for 2 hours, mm-hmm. it's just a wash. And I feel like actually that's, if you can kind of follow me here, that's what's wrong with the new Star Wars movies. That's what's wrong with the Transformers movies. It's just that, like, when everything's just firing full tilt all the time, it's just actually overload and boring. It's not mm-hmm. more, it's actually less.
That's why, like, one of my least favorite of his movies after Planet of the Apes, which is terrible, not even the excellent Mark Wahlberg can save it. I think Nightmare Before Christmas is fucking hot garbage, and I know that's going to be extremely unpopular with our aged goth listenership, but, like, it's just too much, you know. It's too Danny Elfman, it's too all that stuff. And I think the best Tim Burton movie is Pee-wee's
Pee-wee Herman's Big Adventure.
Yeah,
so,
they're phenomenal.
I agree. And then also on a personal level, I just really like Batman Returns.
Oh, it's great.
Because Christopher Walken and of course Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman was amazing. But when I saw...
I've never seen it.
Oh, you haven't? I haven't seen the Transformers movie or Star Wars, so I don't know what you're talking about there.
I wish I could trade with you.
But
the new Star Wars is the shit, though. Rogue One is excellent.
Whatever.
I still have to see it. I have to see it.
It's not the toy hawking nostalgia fest that Force Awakens is. It is a war movie. It's basically the Dirty Dozen in space, and it's great.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's Akira Kurosawa's fingerprints are all over it.
That sounds amazing.
It's great.
But,
I hate you so much.
But I like that those little references that they throw out, because that brings a little realism into what otherwise is an absurd setting. And I don't know. There was like so many things that were left open ended, but I didn't question it. Even rewatching it, I didn't question it, and I'm usually the type of person that's like, wait, it was just day outside, it's night, not thinking like, oh, this is a movie where like the aliens invade space, like, oh, I'm getting so bothered that he's not wearing the same shorts that he did 5 seconds ago. Mm-hmm. I wonder at what point Tim Burton just decided it worked and then kept repeating it, because at first, like, that whole look was just jarring and different, the stripes, like the colors combined with the music. And I feel like maybe after Batman Returns, it did become, just formulaic. Nightmare Before Christmas, at first, I loved it. Mm-hmm. I loved it until that song ruined goth clubs for about 5 years, and I think it still does. Like, This Is Halloween. It's like that.
They play that?
Yes. People dance to it.
Fools.
Sorry, I hate it. I mean, at the time, I really loved the way they did the animation. I loved all of it because I'm a huge fan of the Brothers Quay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that type of stop motion animation, and I thought that movie was beautifully done. I did like that, it was a difference from Tim Burton's previous movies, where it didn't have so much a score as it did like a soundtrack. Mm-hmm. I just think the thing that killed it for me was that people latched onto that as if that defined.
Isn't it weird how like the
everything.
most weaponized Tim Burton aesthetic became the most like basic bitch thing? Like, you can go like into a Hot Topic and get head to toe like Nightmare Before Christmas outfit.
You can go to Walgreens and get that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, around Halloween.
Yeah, he must have made so much money off of that merchandising.
Yeah, I feel like for Nightmare Before Christmas too, that most of, the aesthetic may have been his, but most of the creativity, the animation came from, his last name is Selleck, but I feel like that it's sad that touch is lost, because at the time, like, I think that it was a beautiful story. It was macabre. The way it was done was innovative and interesting, and it made that kind of animation, like, which was sort of creepy, accessible. And I did like the creepiness of that animation. Who is it that did like Attack of the Titans?
I don't know.
You remember the movie with the owl, and it was like all crazy and
Clash of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that was, to me, scary.
That wasn't Harry. That was
Harry
way
Belafonte?
after him. Yeah, Belafonte.
Harry Belafonte invented it.
Yeah. But I it's, you mentioned that, and I thought about when I watched this film, like, how much like that style of stop motion, it's so cool looking now. It's kind of like come through, like it's made its own sort of weird stop motion uncanny valley where you're back to really liking it. Like, because the sandworm is totally goofy stop motion.
It's really janky.
It's janky, and it looks great. And there's another really janky scene is when she discovers that she's not casting a reflection and she's moving the horse. The horse and the horse that's on the other side is just totally not synced up at all. And you think about it, like, man, could they have done a better job with that? I mean, it's unbelievable how bad it looks.
Guess not.
But then again, the metaphysics of the world, it could be slight delay. There could be all kinds of stuff. Now we're
getting into Matrix territory.
I know. So
another movie that ruined the goth scene.
I'm going to go even deeper into Matrix territory with this. I'm going to propose that Pee-wee's Big Adventure takes place in the same universe that Beetlejuice does. And the linking event is the ride with Large Marge.
Yeah, I was going to say Large Marge. Yeah.
Like, I believe that Large Marge, tell him Large Marge sent you. She has the same ability to transform her face into something scary. And she's on this route. She's a ghost. And it's perhaps that she is stuck on that route, repeating that route in her truck over and over again.
That crossed my mind, too, because when I, rewatched the movie, I was like, I wonder if he thought about that scene. Because that was a pretty... Even though it was, like, just a small scene, that was one part that stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
That stuck with me, was that scene with Large Marge, because it came out of nowhere, actually. But I didn't, even though it, like, sort of shocked me at the time, it's not like I disliked it.
Sure.
And I felt like that kind of got explored a little more, and that maybe Beetlejuice was like just a really, really, really annoying and interpretation of Pee Wee Herman that was just kind of pushed into the background because the Large Marge was more interesting. Like, that whole idea was more interesting. But you're right. Like, I just wonder why the movie was called Beetlejuice when it really was not.
It's a good title.
It is a good title.
Yeah, there's a lot of like funny little information. There's hardly anything really about this online compared to a lot of other films, and I expected to find at least somebody's horribly misspent thesis, on this film, and there really isn't very much, especially considering there's so much writing about the afterlife and ghosts, and this is such in my opinion, a very original take on the afterlife.
Right.
All the goofy little rules and like we mentioned before, the bureaucracy. And I believe this movie is one of the very first to introduce the idea of your ghost outfit, which is you're stuck wearing the thing that you die in.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a huge consideration, which I always thought that, Lydia Dietz's decision to maybe kill herself young, hot, and wearing cool clothes was a good one.
Yeah, you know what? I thought about that too. I was like, oh, that is a good idea. Like, I wouldn't want to be dead and wearing something stupid. Stuck in it forever.
That is unfortunately going to happen to me anytime now, because I just basically dress like I work at a farmer's market still.
I don't know. You're kind of looking like a Zach Wild fan.
It's really more of a Duck Dynasty.
It is a Duck Dynasty.
Being a proud son of Louisiana, that's what I have to go with.
But it's kind of SF'd up a little. Like, you look a little more groomed than Duck Dynasty.
Mrs. Lott, are you listening to this?
So another thing that I thought was really interesting that never would have occurred to me back when I originally saw this film is that we were talking about representation and things like that earlier, is that Lydia is this unhappy teen, and the end of the film, it's the merging of these two families plus Otho. Mm-hmm. So she comes home from school and she gets all the praise from two parents in the house currently owned by two other parents, and there's this sort of floating queen. It's this like non-traditional family structure, right? And the happy ending, which is usually the traditional family structure, is, I mean, that's Die Hard. That's all Hollywood films. Just like mom and dad are back together and the kids are happy that that's the case. But in this film, mom and dad and this weird designer occultist uncle and daughter are all living in harmony in one house. And I think that's super fascinating. And it's in this like little small town.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to that. Like, I mean, the idea that it's implied that the Maitlands are unable to have children because the real estate agent's trying to get them to sell the house because it's too big, which is absurd. Because who doesn't want a giant, awesome house? Especially for $260,000, which is what it goes for.
Yeah, or why do you need to like fill every room? Like, why? Why?
Yeah.
Yep. There was nothing else in the town.
Yeah, and then Mrs. Dietz is an evil stepmother. Yeah. She's there to torture Lydia and force her horrible...
Or just maybe never wanted kids in the first place sort of person, which...
Totally. Yeah. She's in the way of her
I have to say, just as an aside, she's kind of one of my favorite characters ever. Like, Heather O'Hara is just like
she's greatest.
Phenomenal.
She's great in that movie. like I said, I mean, it was her look too that I was kind of after, but I kind of loved that she was just like not putting up with it, and no, we have to do this. And
we weren't all born to be parents. Were we?
Or but maybe it does work out if you have like help from other
From the dead.
from the dead.
Fuck. I mean, you don't have to pay your supernatural au pair. You know, like
cheap labor.
yeah.
Right, and she just seems so excited that she got this look into this world that she obviously was fascinated by because her interests, I'm assuming, were morbid, much like mine are. There's just not a whole lot about that movie online as far as anyone trying to make any connection or any sense of
I think
the
that
story.
is like it's probably one of the things I thought the most about this film was how little commentary there was. You know, it's all the rage right now to make 50 things you didn't recognize in Beetlejuice and or whatever film. And there's one, and the only thing of note it pointed out was the sweater pants. And there's really not a whole lot else. There's some conversation about the proposed sequel, which takes place in Hawaii, which seems totally absurd to me.
So glad it wasn't made. But apparently the sequel is like on again.
Yeah.
The Beetlejuice 2 is like actually kind of getting momentum at the moment.
Yeah, it's
In
like a
Hawaii.
direct pickup sequel.
Yeah. Not in Hawaii though.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there was originally there was just gonna be a sequel and it takes place in Hawaii. But
Okay, here's some questions
But
since
it
you guys are professional goths.
Thank you.
Do you think
Yes.
26 years later, Lydia Dietz, do you think she'll still be a goth, or do you think she'll do what so many of our sisters have done and thrown off the outfit in exchange for whatever that LA boho thing is?
You know what? I would say that she would be somewhat the same because she has had an actual experience with ghosts. I think that maybe if it was just a look, that she might change and just turn out to look just like Gina Davis did in that movie. But again, it's weird because their personalities weren't just. Of course, there wasn't enough time to really develop any personalities. Just by the few things that Lydia said. Of course, I adore her because the few things she did said really resonated with me, like her, just her like deadpan attitude, and combined with this elaborate clothing. You know, it was really exaggerated and different, and just with the lack of fear. You know, with something that would normally scare a person, like she just was just curious, like, are you dead? Like, where are you? Like, you know, had all these questions, which is, I feel like, would be my reaction if I encountered a ghost. Be like, what are you? Come back here. Can you do something? Can you do this? You know, and probably annoy them so much that they would actually leave. I just think that there's actually nothing really to comment on because there's nothing that's really cohesive through the whole movie.
Although I think following a through line maybe through who she is in the film and where we leave off with her is she's this dark, introspective person who through the course of the movie contemplates suicide and is asking questions like, how do I get to where you are? And it's partly that she wants to die, but it's partly that she wants to be around these parents that actually seem to appreciate her for who she is.
Yeah,
like there seems to be this kind of split reason for her wanting to cross over. And then at the end of the movie, she's not holding darkness, you know, and in a certain sense it's like, oh, fucking sell out. But on the other hand, it's like, no, she's been this weight that she's been carrying around, which wasn't just some sort of like adolescent angst. It was like she was carrying some sort of dark weight that she was able to lift off. And I just sort of see her all these years later as being like a motivational speaker or like writing self-help books, or like she went through the other side and came out so light that I would hope she would like share that with us.
I would still hope that she would dress all in black, take photos, and still be really obsessed with the dead. You know.
See, I don't think she needs to because they're in her family. There's no like darkness anymore.
Yeah.
It's just they're just around.
But
But
she's
that brings
also
up-
rich, and her stepmom is an artist, so like they typically, you know, so who knows?
But that brings up the whole question of whether or not like being goth is actually, you know, is a state of being that you need to pass out of. You know, like I'm probably never gonna not dress in black. You know, I'm gonna keep my records. The stuff the art I have in my walls is definitely definitely what would be considered macabre. But that doesn't mean I don't like other things. That's just me.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of hoping that maybe that's with her, because of course there was some teenage angst, but I think that comes with anybody that decides to seek a different culture or subculture where you're gonna be definitely looked at in a way that's different because you're dressing differently. So you're subjecting yourself to ridicule by your peers. So there's a certain amount of suffering, but there's a certain amount of like wanting to be yourself. And then I don't know if that will to do that sticks with you for the rest of your life, because I don't know if you were, I guess, like that emotionally tormented, whether or not you would want to fit in, or if you just decide to go full blown the other way. And I think that's the case for some people, but I feel like most of my friends, they're still very dark, but have kids.
They go on the goth cruises.
Oh gosh, I don't know why you want to go on those cruises.
I always say this about, like, as goth couples age with each other, they eventually just end up looking like comedy magic duos. And it is my favorite thing in the world, like an older goth couple together. I mean, this is great,
I will say that the stuff that I grew, that really stuck with me, like the albums I was listening about back then, stuck with me because I felt like there was more to it. Like I could still read into some of it and be like, oh yes, Robert Smith ripped this entire song off of Baudelaire.
It's interesting you bring that up, because like I don't listen to any dark wave goth music at all. Like especially anything industrial. Like part of it reminds me of some bad times, but I don't listen to any of it. But I'm still deeply immersed in the literature that informed all of it, which it's interesting that stuck with me. And then it's strange to me to see like how super goth and non-PVC corny like young girls are, or not young girls, but like your 18 to 21 year old like alt models, like how like they just nail it. Like on we have a bunch of them that follow our Instagram page, and so I see them in our feed and stuff like that, and it's like they look perfect. Like they look like how like old propaganda magazine girls would look or something like that. It's super weird.
I think that's actually really, really cool. I feel like the whole way I fell into it was, maybe I saw some stuff in magazines. I think back then I had a subscription to Star Hits, and the only way I had to find out about these things was through magazines. I also had a subscription to Thrasher, but I read those books, basically all the classes of gothic literature. So that was my joke for a long time. Like, are you really goth or are you a poser? Like, have you read Melmoth the Wanderer? Like, that sort of thing.
And that was like one of the things that was really kind of weird for me. I've certainly had my, like there's pictures of me 15 years old with a cape in a graveyard and stuff like that. Maybe I'll load them online if I can find them. But, I was into that stuff. But I was primarily a metalhead kid from Metairie, Louisiana, which is the suburb next to New Orleans, which is basically where all the dudes from Pantera are from, right? So that's what I was really into. But the moment I discovered that there were actual goth girls walking around, I was like, where's that goddamn eyeliner, bro? And it just never, I always felt like kind of a poser because I just never felt like I looked right in those outfits or whatever. I mean, there's a funny picture of me and Omar standing outside Shudder one night, and he's wearing a Bauhaus shirt, and I have an NRA t-shirt on. It just, at a fucking goth club, And it's a black t-shirt, but I mean, it just never really, like, I don't know. I just never felt like true or real or whatever. And it was weird just being in New Orleans, too. You just felt like you had some sort of, like, claim to it. And then,
New Orleans, it's got its own special brand.
Yeah, and, like, in South Park, there's that whole war between the vampire kids and the goth kids.
I love it.
That shit was real in New Orleans. It was real. Because kids would read Interview with the Vampire and come to New Orleans and basically be squatters and set up around Jackson Square with their shitty tarot decks, and that's how they would live. And they would treat each other with this like weird mock LARPer sort of culture deal, like where they would like refer to each other as vampiric royalty, and it was so goddamn weird. And then I remember my friends were more, industrial or music oriented, and we would read something like Industrial Nation or Carpe Nocturne, and we look at it and we would look longingly at the San Francisco scene.
Yeah.
And there was none of that in San Francisco, and we were like, wow, if only we could live
in New Orleans, you mean?
In New Orleans, yeah, there was none of that cool, like, just like edgy, dark, like industrial stuff. And it's just, man, it's just weird, all this like regional gothism. It seems to have slipped away a little bit. Like the vampire thing, to my knowledge, is kind of waning.
I feel like that's like a whole separate thing that gets associated with the goth scene. But I think you brought up something, which was that, there was, I was definitely in it because I loved the music. At least with Shudder, that's something that I tried to do.
That was the best goth club ever, because it was always about fun. Like, that was a club. It was a really tongue-in-cheek goth experience, Club Shudder in San Francisco.
We were very serious about the music.
But there would be, like, mountains of candy on the tables.
Yeah, I wanted to do that.
Which I would just eat like crazy. Like, we would have, there would always be Halloween candy. And then the people who came were really fun. Like, like what's it? The dude from AFI, like Davey Havoc.
Yeah.
Like, that's the nicest human I've ever met, probably.
Yeah, had the look, but, definitely was like a very happy person and, talked to everybody. And then, the person that decided to wear a cape, but it was actually just a, like, table runner, safety pin to his shoulders.
It was phenomenal.
It's fine, totally fine. Like, you love this Bauhaus song, you're in. Anybody who was going to sit there in the corner and be like pissed about someone with an orange t-shirt dancing, it's like, you don't get it. That's not the point. Like,
yeah, and I would bartend at those nights, and I made the most ludicrous drink specials. We would just straight up make Kool-Aid and just pour whatever promo liquor we had in it, and it would be like $1 for like a pint glass.
They loved it, by the way.
Yeah,
and
people would get wrecked.
That still carried on. Like, there was like a thing now. Still do it. Like, every once in a while there'll be like a reunion thing. And I always have to have the dum-dums, those lollipops, because they'll order a vodka soda and then they'll make it different flavors by stirring the lollipop in there.
I feel like that was my contribution to mixology.
Lollipops? Awesome. Is the waning of goth culture proportional to the waning of vodka as being a popular alcoholic beverage?
I don't know. I think now, like, it's almost like when you see a goth girl, it's like, are you a porn star?
That's true.
There's
like,
kind of that going on.
You don't really know. I feel like it's definitely been a look that's been in fashion for like years now. Yeah. And in high fashion. And then there's also suicide girls. Mm-hmm. And then the whole fetish scene also gets lumped in there, but there's a definite look for that. And I know that it's actually really popular right now, those accessories. Mm-hmm. I mean, also I feel social media maybe has kind of sort of regulated a look. So I could meet someone that looks really goth, and then I'll ask them something, and like, and having them tell me like, oh, that's weird, why would you do that? And be like, okay, I guess.
Well, I feel like what we've sort of taken for granted as being goth is just it means something completely different now.
It does.
I feel like it's really exploded. Like,
but does it? I think there's just more of it. I don't know that it's any different, because it's always been about the fetishization of these cool little dark objects, and like Kristen Stewart is basically a goth for real.
Right. But what I more mean is that like when the three of us at some point came aware of the word, the subculture, the music, and they were all fused in a pretty organic way, right? It's not like there was one way to be goth, but there were these bands and these fashion senses, and the subcultures had certain kinds of tribal rules to them. They were flexible from town to town, but there's a certain consistency. But really, right now, someone who like does their Instagram makeup tutorials and health goth and
which is the best. The best.
No, health goth is rad. It's
I
super
remember
fascinating.
when someone first said that to me, and I was like, "What are you talking about?
It's super fascinating.
What are you talking about?"
But like the elegant gothic Lolita thing, the fetish communities,
normcore goth.
Oh my gosh!
None of these
this
things.
Is crazy.
None of these things actually have anything in common. Like, they don't all listen to the same bands. They don't go to the same clubs. They don't necessarily hang together. So I feel like we sort of think of them as all being part of goth.
It's
but that
interesting,
tree has expansive branches that
Yeah, I mean,
if I can
feel
foil
like,
that metaphor, don't connect.
The taxonomy has definitely gotten pretty wide. I don't want to say thinly spread, but widely spread. I mean, I remember in the 90s, if you were kind of on that goth shit, you would go to another town and you would look for goth stuff like if you came to America and you were Irish, you would look for an Irish neighborhood.
Right, exactly.
You would go
exactly.
you would go to like Little 5 Points in Atlanta or wherever there was like the freak show.
Right, like I was always look for that because I felt like, or certain shows, that you could go and meet people and I'll be able to be free to be myself as far as what I can say or like how I can dress.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can be yourself with us.
Oh, thank you. Do you think Thank you. I really like that. And, I will go change into more black.
One of the things that's kind of like fun about looking back at Beetlejuice now is, that kind of like fashion statement really was the thing that broke out of that film more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that the only real touch point musically in the film is Danny Elfman's soundtrack, which is excellent, and maybe his best soundtrack in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it was that and Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure, which is an amazing
theme song
soundtrack.
for Pee Wee
is
really special.
It just kills me. But I think there was a song that anyone remembers from that movie. It is Harry Belafonte's song, which is just the antithesis of everything goth. But at the time, I remember just hanging out in the graveyards or whatever, and but we are happy. This is what makes us happy. That's why we're here. And I think Beetlejuice was a happy movie. A very it's a lot of black humor in there. That was it was just dark, but it was take dark subjects, and
it's pretty funny and it's pretty fun.
And I think it made it lighthearted, which is I feel like something that was very core to just me as a personality. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've taken that sort of Beetlejuice sort of fun thing to it's sort of carried through my entire life. Like I've liked the candy, come as you are. The one thing that's gonna bond us is the music, and maybe we'll talk about stuff, but it's not really serious.
Could you imagine how shitty the world would be if The Matrix came out before this? You know what I mean? Like that kind of like grandma's boy goth dude.
Wait,
was
what?
the ascendant.
Oh my god, the leather coat! Come on.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Well, backing up a little bit.
Yeah, you lost me.
This movie came so early on in kind of like gothic culture stuff, especially the '90s explosion or whatever. And it is an explicitly funny, fun, goofy movie. I mean, it's a horror comedy. It's up there with your movie Return of the Living Dead as far as just being like it's just fun.
Yeah.
And
I would also say that the whole stripes in the movie really resonated because it was really popular at the time to wear those black and white striped tights.
Oh yeah, all that stuff came. Think about Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, which was pop. It was which originally appeared in a goth scene, Carpe Nocturne or
Carpe Nocturne, yeah.
Yeah. And like that, the look of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac is, very, very obviously inspired by the Tim Burton look, but. It's interesting how both of these franchises, like Johnny and the Homicidal Maniac, ended in a cartoon, Invader Zim on Nickelodeon. Right? That, you talk about like peak goth, that's crazy. And then, we haven't even talked about it, but Beetlejuice was a 4-season running, it ran for 4 years.
Cartoon, very successful cartoon.
A very successful cartoon. And then you have Lydia Dietz teaming up with Beetlejuice, which is super odd because you just basically extract the two most extreme, most fun characters from the show, ignore the fact that Beetlejuice is sort of a rapist, and let him go hang out with this little girl.
I think there's always going to be a fascination though with these dark characters. I mean, just for an example, Batman, I think is people are always going to be fascinated by this person who's troubled, who you can't decide whether they're good or bad, and that's what makes them more interesting. Beetlejuice, I think, also did the same thing, albeit from a lighter-hearted place. I kind of really appreciate that, just because, in the way it translates into real life, it's like, what I'm doing is not wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not hurting anybody. This is just what I like.
And all those series all have really great Agent of Chaos villains. Beetlejuice is a chaotic agent. Both Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger's Jokers are just chaotic and weird. And that
Danny DeVito's penguin, like
amazing,
so disgusting
amazing,
looking. Yeah,
so disgusting,
amazing.
so weird. Also, Pee Wee Herman plays his dad in the film, so there's like that. Those little
Francis.
It's so
Francis.
good. But like the idea of a dark but nearly psychedelic villain, I think, is really something that you would be able to look back and say, okay, that's a Tim Burton thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes. I know, he's just like he's just so interesting to me now because I feel like he's fallen into a formula that's so predictable that there's even, a parody of it online of him making a movie where they all call, they grab it, grab his phone and it immediately calls Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter.
It's something I was wondering about, like he's definitely I would put in the camp of auteur filmmakers, for sure. And, he's made really diverse, incredible movies. I mean, like, Ed Wood is totally unlike... I mean, it definitely is like his other movies because there's that madcap, hilarious darkness going on and a love of morbid and weird characters, like just an adoration for them. I love how he just handles these characters so sweetly. And you see that a little bit with the main character, the father in Big Fish. He has this loving touch for things. And you don't see that a lot in other dark movies. It's there's always there's menace a lot of times, and I think that's very unique. And I think the thing that makes Beetlejuice so enduringly enjoyable.
Yeah, I think actually that's what it is. It is that sweetness. I would say that Lydia is a really endearing character. Mm-hmm. Like she's not overly. She's a little dark and she's quirky for sure, but she's not unrelatable. She just happens to be really excited that she finds these ghosts, and ghosts are normally scary. And I would say that couple was also really endearing. Yeah, and even totally. Their attempts to try to scare the family out were just kind of cute.
Yeah, they're just silly. That's another thing that happens in a lot of Tim Burton's movies, like the veneration of the All-American kind of. You could almost imagine him doing an episode of Friday Night Lights. He's just he has that thing just dialed in so tight. And it's interesting, the villain of this film are New York yuppies. That's the real villainy, is the encroaching, just elite yuppie gentrifying influence on this little town. And it's just... And gentrification is probably the wrong word. Cause I don't know what it is when a shittier version of white people take over white people's area. Who knows what that looks like? I mean, maybe there's a word for that.
Right.
Yeah.
He touches on that again though with the in Batman Returns, where the villain is definitely this New York businessman.
Yeah. Yeah, something that I notice in his films, and maybe you guys can correct me on this, is the weird never influences the normal, but the normal always influences the weird in these films.
How's that?
For instance, you have, all these efforts, and it always kind of fails. There's the effort to dress up Edward Scissorhands in normal clothes, or at the end of the film, Lydia Dietz is in a Catholic school or something like that. Or even, Marc escapes from the apes and they don't ever get him in the end. I don't know, whatever. But it just seems like the normal is always sort of more powerful than the odd in his films. Or I could be wrong.
No, you're right. I do notice that, but that's why it'd be interesting, because it kind of does leave that question unanswered at the end of every film. That has a somewhat, linear storyline. I mean, Batman's a whole separate thing because that story was already written. That was already...
Well, most of what he does is already written. I mean, they're all... Well, a profound number of his films are previously existing stories or properties. Or
what property would you want to see him tackle? If you had a choice...
I want him to never make another movie. I want him to stop. Unless he's gonna fucking get his shit together, I want him to just stop wasting.
If we can get him from the 90s, we get a time machine.
Oh, okay.
Bring him forward.
Oh God.
Yeah. Okay. So 1994, Tim Burton. Ooh. You get to you're the producer, and you get to slap a franchise from now, anytime. So it'll be a totally fucked up timeline. But like that talent, that originality, that freshness, that lack of issues.
I would probably like to see more of like Edward Scissorhands and Beetlejuice.
Well, I mean, a different franchise. Like if he was going to do
franchise?
like Tim Burton's Twilight or something like that.
Oh, huh. I guess I would like to see him tackle. Well, he already tackled Frankenstein, but if he tackled something like maybe an updated version of like Othello, by Shakespeare,
Oh, wow.
or Macbeth,
Like something weird, like the Titus Andronicus that has Anthony Hopkins.
exactly,
Yeah.
because that's something that he can bring in, like the realm of the absurd. You know, especially with Macbeth.
Man, there's a very gothy Macbeth that has Patrick Stewart in it that is excellent. It's basically a Marilyn Manson video. It's really great. The witches are done very well.
Cool.
Patrick Stewart is, as always, phenomenal in a Shakespearean role.
I think I would love to see early 90s Tim Burton take on a Lovecraft story.
Ooh,
and finally
really good.
Yeah,
And-
Mountains
and-
of Madness or something.
or something.
Yeah.
You know, like, especially because like Lovecraft is on film never been done right, except for, as far as I'm concerned, The Thing,
Yeah.
which I would love to tackle on this podcast
Man.
someday. But like, someone needs to do a Lovecraft movie properly, and he at that time probably could have, like, if he was to put, because back then he was taking more chances and going in more very different directions, and I think he could have gone like real dark.
Yeah. Well, all the scenes before they gets into the weird territory could have been just totally like textbook vintage Casablanca looking. You know, like the old biplanes going into the weird area. And then once you crest into the beyond, imagine what his city would look like. It would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better than what I was going to pick.
Or even like a Philip K. Dick thing.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like, what does it look like if he's doing a disjointed non-sci-fi?
Ooh, his Man in the High Castle would have been cool.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Totally.
Huh. Now I'm like thinking more about this, and then I was just thinking that maybe today's equivalent of Tim Burton, although I think he's way more talented, is Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, totally. Way more talented.
You know,
The
he.
Strain is terrible.
Well, I haven't seen
yeah.
that, but I think he is doing Mountains of Madness.
Cool.
Is Guillermo
Is
del
it back
Toro.
on? Because it was on hold because
Well, that's
Prometheus.
what I heard.
Yeah, because he shelved it because he was like, okay, Prometheus is basically kind of my version of In the Mountains of Madness.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my Tim Burton movie, Tim Burton does The Warriors.
Oh my god.
Dude, that's so good. But I just thought of something that trumps everything. Sandman.
Oh.
That actually.
Like, if he just did them all, like, just like committed a decade to doing the Sandman
But it would have
properly.
to be an HBO show. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
it
it'd have to
TV
be a
show, yeah.
series.
The whole idea of doing it Sandman as a film, it just bums me out. It just, I mean, not because I don't think like the franchise couldn't be represented on film. I think now it could. I just think that everything that like the nested storytelling that's so much a part of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, where you're telling a story and inside the story somebody's telling a story and then they're telling another story. Like I could just see you're watching an episode of the show and you're like, why the fuck is this Shakespearean now? And then next week
Right.
it's just not. You know, and I don't think you could have the time for that in a film unless you went like full on Jodorowsky and pitched an 18-hour movie. But then you're back at basically what HBO is.
I mean, I think like Neil Gaiman came, or the Sandman, at least my awareness of it was after sort of Tim Burton sort of established himself as...
Oh, I would have never discovered the Sandman without Beetlejuice, probably.
Right, because the character of Death was so sort of, you know, similar to the entire spirit of Beetlejuice.
Do you feel like the goth culture, I guess we'll call it a culture, is uniquely multimedia? Because you don't hear like punk rockers with these same kind of like, you know, referencing literature and film and music and art and history.
Absolutely. I feel like it is a unique culture. At least it was in the 90s when I think it was at its height, because there is a genre of literature that is Gothic literature, and it's well written. It's not like Anne Rice. It's not Twilight. It is these classic books that were tormented. You know, you have Bram Stoker's Dracula, you have Frankenstein, which I still think is probably one of the saddest books or saddest stories ever written. You have Edgar Allan Poe. You have like a whole thing that, you know, like definitely creates a mood, and it has a definite sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
And in a way, I feel like that's where the whole look sort of came in, because it was around that time. and then the Victorian and Edwardian thing came in naturally. The whole like cartoonish stuff I think came from Edward Gorey. And his drawings. And there was also Aubrey Beardsley, I think, was also like a huge influence. Also like Sartre and the existentialist books. But I think it's because the music that, was being listened to often referenced literature.
Yeah, you listen to Cure and you're like a step away from reading Camus.
Or Baudelaire, the Gorman Gas trilogy by Mervyn Peake.
Oh, totally. That is a book series that I would love to see on screen.
I don't think that there was maybe that much, like, I felt like it was a really all-encompassing, like you said, there was also in art. You saw it a lot. There
Home decor, for Christ's sake,
Exactly.
I know.
Before, like, Halloween there's a lot of, like, people that I feel like decorate their houses like it's a country Halloween, like, all year round.
Oh, my high school girlfriend, Irma, who I hope is listening to this, because she was such a delight to date in high school, because she kind of looks like Liddy Dietz did at the time,
Oh, everybody wanted Liddy Dietz.
And her and her husband are my favorite, among my favorite people on earth. And you go to their house, and it's still goth as fuck. But it's suburban, too, though. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but, like, they have, like, a full 8 dish set, but it's all black with bats and shit all over it, and they have a Halloween party every year that is a goddamn rager, but in a tradition of South Louisiana ragers. It is like people passed out on the lawn with, like, like the red Solo cups, but they're black. I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I would say, like, my friends that, I would still consider really goth now, and, like myself included, may have, like, updated their looks. Like, I have, like, my sets of plates, and, it's all very adult, but they're black, and they've got skulls told in them in gold. Like people,
people seem to stick it out as goths, unlike other things. I mean, even think about, like, the broad influence on the culture. Edgar Allan Poe invented the police procedural. I mean, look how, and there's just a hop, skip, and a jump to Gump. And once again, oh my god, I did it. Every single episode I bring up Forrest Gump because I love Forrest Gump. I think it's like the greatest film ever made.
Oh my gosh, I hated that movie.
Look at this. This is how I know that I'm not a true goth. It's because I love Forrest Gump. Man, I'm just off the rails now.
Please change the subject.
What I was going to say, the reason before I accidentally said Gump, which I swear to God was an accident, was Law and Order. You go, like, there's just a direct chain between Edgar Allan Poe and Law and Order, which is probably, I think, police procedural might be the most popular genre of all time. And it's about murder and death and crime, which is as goth as it gets. I think all this, I know we're getting deep into goth territory, so for any of our non-goth, there's none of you. You guys are all goths. Our entire audience is like older goth girls and new wave bears. It seems to be like that's, I love like that. It's great. It's the best audience of all time. Yeah, they're the best. But it seems like
be my friend, guys. No, really.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, please plug out your social media connections because you are a famous DJ. So for horror movies, the modern, like all the new auteur horror movies, everybody's like Kubrickian. Do you think, or has it happened, do you think that we're going to see like a Burtonian scene in movies? And has it happened?
I was thinking about this before, and I think that it would be a while because I think Tim Burton's cachet, the aesthetics that he has been milking for so long, are kind of played out and boring right now. And it might be a while before someone can come along and remind us of what was interesting about him in the first place, because anybody that would sort of play with his style right now would be just, we're already sick of Tim Burton, the real thing at the moment. We don't need even more, like Tim Burton is already too Tim Burton. For there to be another one is too much. So it might be a while, like if Tim Burton, the real Tim Burton, like backs off or dies or actually changes his approach, it might leave room for us to sort of like catch a breath for some sort of new blood.
Right. I don't know if there's another director or, series or movie that has that sort of element of the absurd. brought in, and Tim Burton's was definitely, taken from comic books, something that was completely, fantastical, and then bring that same sort of like balance of sweetness and horror, and sort of balance it out in normal life. I feel that maybe there's some series going on right now that might have that, and I would think American Horror Story. And then
that's a great point.
Yeah.
And then
True.
Black Mirror, it's just going to be brought in a different way. But I think American Horror Story does have that sweetness. It does have something that's reoccurring, which is the same actors playing different characters. Yeah. And they sort of bring it around. But there are some horrific moments. They bring in horrific things from real life. But there's some moments of real sweetness there, and then there's humor. I really adore that series.
American Horror Story Coven is basically the X-Men. So back to our what would we like to see him do? I think a Tim Burton X-Men would be cool.
Oh, do we have to think about X-Men more than we already do?
Did you say X-Men or Axeman?
I probably said Axeman because I've mispronounced everything because I'm from the South.
Whatever, Chad. There was an Axeman in Coven, so...
Was it? Oh, right. Yeah, actually, even in that series, too.
Yeah.
Maybe, look, I'm just, like, full of the Freudians. I got the Freudians.
Let's fade to black and roll the credits, and why don't we start with Nako? Do you have anything to plug, or at least tell our listeners where they can find you? Well,
I guess in the usual haunting places online, Facebook and Instagram, Nakoeth, which is me trying to medievalize my name. But you can find me there, or through you guys.
We'll post links.
Yeah, I definitely still do some events in the city, throw parties and still DJ, and if you're a baby bat, I will definitely take you under my wing because I have a special place in my heart for you guys.
Unfortunately, our audience seems to start at 35, so they're not going to be hearing you.
Oh, sad. Bring on the young ones. Come on.
That's what I say.
Maybe we should stop doing movies from the 80s and we'll get a younger audience. Hey, see you guys next time for Return of the Living Dead from 1985.
Holla.
Thanks for listening.
Good night.
Good night.